What is up, everybody, and welcome to the third ELO discussion video of the rank climb. For today's video, I'm going to be talking about the ELO that I used to manage to climb out of, gold. So, if you've seen the screen by now, you probably realize what I'm going to be talking about today, and I think it's a pretty big deal when you reach gold and higher, because it's something that really takes a lot more priority between players, as it is a really big part of the game that usually is mostly practiced in team ranks rather than in solo queue, but it does also have a lot of impact in solo queue. So it's champion select. Um, the art of picking your champions and picking counters and things that work well with your team and works well against the enemy team is a really important one, because I'm sure some of you guys have already heard the saying of oh, we lost this game before the game even started, or oh, we lost this game at champion select. Like these things, well, they may sound like exaggerations, and sometimes when they're being mentioned like that, they are exaggerations. Can be a real thing. You can actually lose a game before it starts because of champion picks that just didn't make any sense at all in your team, whereas the enemy team's champion picks were really good and they worked really well together. So we need to kind of understand what makes a good champion pick together. What makes some good champion synergy. So let's take an example from one of my recent games. It would be game 152, where I played Malphite top lane. I'm not like the most keen Malphite player, because I don't really like to play Malphite that much, to be honest. I think he's like a utility champion that is very tanky, can deal damage. You build Malphite for damage, but he is really mostly effective as a tank, because that is just the way he's designed. He's meant to last forever almost, and this is kind of his thing, because he's supposed to go into the fight first, initiate, and you stand there and soak up what's called, not experience, sorry, stand there and soak up damage for his team, and he's really good at this. Now, from a solo queuer perspective, he doesn't seem to be that good, because you want to deal damage, you want to be the one to get the kills off, and kind of lead the team into victory by just getting everyone killed, basically. But sometimes you can't think like that. Sometimes you have to think of the bigger picture. What works with your team. And in that game, I had a choice, and I made the most out of it, because I realized my team could do with some initiation, and we did have a Yasuo mid lane, and we were actually starting to have a pretty decent comp together, and it was, a knock-up comp. Team comps like that are really valuable in solo queue, because once the laning phase is over, what do you rely on? You rely on team fighting or split pushing. And if you're gonna be planning on having a good team fight, you need to have champions that work pretty well together, or just have some kind of crazy combo. And the most typical combo that you can think of is like the AoE combo wombo. Elo is like the most common comp ever, because it's something that most people actually try to go for, because it's the easiest comp to put together, because it's really hard to mess it up once it's started. And in low elo, people tend to clump up together, so it just makes it so catching out people in an AoE is that much easier. So a Mumu, Galio, Malphite, Orianna, blah blah blah. Like, there's a lot of champions that fall into this category of AoE ultimates, but you get the idea. By just piling on a bunch of champions like this, you can win a team fight without having much thought put into like the actual team fight. You just ult and then you win, right? Of course, the counter to this is, when people start playing a little bit smarter and they start splitting up between each other, then the AoE isn't gonna be that effective anymore, and it becomes a problem, because now suddenly you can't AoE the entire team. And if you use AoE one person, what if it's the tank and it survives, and then suddenly you can't stop the rest of the enemy team? They're gonna destroy you once your ultimate is on cooldown. So there's like, there's a strategy, then there's a counter strategy, and it's a good part about League, because it's so dynamic. You can really change it up a lot. But anyways, that was just me talking about an example of a team comp that can be made in Champions Select. But I was talking about my Malphite game, right? So I picked Malphite to synergize with the Yasuo, because the Yasuo, can ult onto the targets that I ulted, because that's how knockups work together with Yasuo's ultimate. And therefore, I can initiate onto the backline or onto the, really like split up targets, so that we can just make a really quick catch and kill them off quickly. And it worked out well because that game we really did catch out quite a few people with my ultimate and just starting team fights like that, and it made for some really good damage before the actual team fight broke out, and that meant our team had the edge in team fights. So it was a really good pick in my opinion, and not to mention that it synergized with my team. It also became a counter because I had to lane against an Irelia in that game, and Irelia is a champion that really relies a lot on attack speed. And Malphite is one of the few champions that can actually reduce an enemy champion's attack speed. So by reducing Irelia's attack speed, I lowered her damage output in team fights, and also I kind of made it to the point that she couldn't kill me on her own in the lane. And that's kind of a big deal for Irelia because she's like a strong laner that is supposed to win all lanes and snowball. I didn't allow her to snowball. I didn't let her become the big threat that she needed to be for her team. And therefore, I sort of counterpicked the lane, even though it was more of a staling lane. I just managed to stay alive, and that is like a really big deal when you're playing against Irelia because you don't want to make her snowball. And therefore, Malphite was just like a really, really solid pick for that team comp. And I was really glad I picked him, even though I don't really like to play him that much. I understood that he was a pretty big part to, make sure that my team wins that game. And guess what? We won that game. Sorry for spoilers if you haven't seen it yet. But yeah, you get the idea, right? Champions that work well together. It's a thing. There's a lot more, like these strategies that champions that work well together. Like some that I can think of is like Olaf together with Lulu. Like Lulu speeds up Olaf, and then Olaf goes on a rampage. Blah blah blah. And then there's like Rengar ulting in with the Orianna ball onto him, and then Orianna ultimates. But I'm not going to be mentioning all the possible comps. Like there's several different ones, and there's always new ones coming up because people don't realize the synergies between these picks. But yeah, you get the idea. You can pick champions that work well together, and then you can also pick champions that don't really work well together. And then you have to ask yourself, why would you do that? Do you want to lose? No, it's probably because you don't realize it, or you don't really give it much respect. So there is also the opposite to synergy, which is a lack of synergy with your team. An example of lack of synergy would be when I was playing Rumble in game 127. I had to play together with a Janna support, and honestly, Rumble and Janna, they are very good champions. They're pretty good team fighting champions, and they are very effective at winning games by just being really useful to their teams. Now the problem is when you put these two champions together in a team, their ultimates almost effectively cancel each other out, because the way Roma's ultimate works is that you drop down a line, it deals magic damage if people are inside of the line, and therefore you must really put it in a way that people have a hard time leaving that line. And Janna's ultimate is that when she ultimates, she knocks enemy champions away from her where she stands. So if a team fight suddenly breaks out, like you get suddenly engaged on, chances are Rumble's gonna drop his ultimate, and then Janna's gonna ultimate away the tanks because she thinks that her AD carry or her carries are being threatened. And yeah, that's natural. She's supposed to do that. But the thing is, while she's doing that, she might actually be pushing people out of the Rumble ultimate, which is the biggest source of damage for Rumble. So if Rumble's not dealing damage with his ultimate, he's kind of being nullified as a champion in that game. And this happened once, I believe, in that game. Like, it was like embottling under the turret for the inhib. I dropped down my ultimate, and then Janna ulted immediately and then pushed away a target that I was trying to kill. I mean, it was a little bit frustrating, but it wasn't that bad. There have been worse cases for me in the future, or in the past, not in the future, sorry, where I dropped down my Rumble ultimate and someone completely knocked the enemies away, from my ultimate, and I was like, oh my god, we just lost the team fight because you did that. But you can blame another person for doing that misplay as much as you want, but then it comes down to, why did I pick Rumble in Champion Select when I knew there were champions in my team that had knockbacks? That's like a risk that you're taking. And to have your ultimate nullified like that because a team fight broke out, and then someone was just trying to be useful, that's a disaster. So that's kind of when you have to tell yourself, maybe I should have picked a different champion, one that gets less screwed over by their own team. I mean, I experienced this from a very early point when I was playing League. Like when I was playing Kennen, I learned this the hard way already. Like Kennen's ultimate, it requires people to be, inside of his ultimate for them to get damaged and stunned. And yeah, the same thing happened. Gragas, Janna, Lee Sin, Tristana, all of these ultimates work really badly together with Kennen's ultimate when a team fight suddenly breaks out. So, as much as you want to say they shouldn't be using their knockbacks so much without thought, without thinking, but in solo queue it's really random. You can't really control everything. The only thing you can control about solo queue is your own plays and choices, and in this case it would be champion choices. Maybe Kennen wasn't such a good pick after all, and that's kind of when I told myself maybe I should start playing Kennen less when I know that my team has knockbacks. And you would be surprised by how much I suddenly started winning, because all of a sudden, my team fights were completely ruined, and it was a good feeling. Because I felt like I really learned something valuable by having all those terrible team fights broken out on me. And I realized, champion select really does play a big deal when it comes to, deciding the fate of a game sometimes. Obviously, it also comes down to, your own individual skill and how well you work well with others, but sometimes you're very limited to the champion that you've picked yourself. So if you know what your teammates have picked, and you know what could work well with them, and also what could work well against the enemy team, if you can find a perfect balance between those two things, and it turns, into a champion, maybe you should be playing that champion. And who knows, maybe your champion will actually become the key to winning the game. And all of a sudden, you're like, wow, pat myself on the back, dude. I just won this game because I did the right thing at Champion Select. I mean, that is a very extreme example, but sometimes it can actually turn out that way. Anyways, I talked a lot about counters and synergy. I did notice just now that I forgot to mention one last point that I wanted to talk about in the video before I end. And it's probably going to be a little bit of a lengthy one, but it's also a very important part, and it's damage diversification. So in League of Legends, there's two types of damage if you don't count true damage. There's physical damage, and then there is the magic damage. Physical damage is usually tied to, the AD carry in bot lane, the auto attack heavy champion that pretty much deals most of their damage through physical. And then there's the mid laner, who usually is a magic damage champion, a mage, the traditional card is Veigar, blah blah blah, champions that, stack AP items to deal more damage to their spells. And this is the standard, right? Like, this is what is expected from a basic perspective from the game at this point, because of the way the meta shaped out to be. And sometimes the game isn't always played like this. Sometimes you can have some exceptions. In middle lane, you can also play AD champions, right? You can play physical damage champions. There's Jace, there's Zed, there's Talon, there's Riven, there's Pantheon, there's, like, the list goes on. You can even play AD carries in middle. And the thing is, when someone decides to do this, it's better that you start paying attention in Champion Select, because there is one big disaster that always happens, and well, okay, I shouldn't say always, but it happens pretty often, I should say, when I want to play a middle champion that is AD. And okay, so let's take an example. I'm like, okay, this game I feel like playing middle Jace, because Jace is a fun champion and he's also pretty strong when everything goes right. And I pick Jace, and then I'm gonna watch my top laner and jungler being picked. What do I see? I see top lane Pantheon, and then right after, Lee Sin. And, when you think about it, top lane Pantheon is a pretty legit pick, like, he can destroy people in the lane, then he roams around with his ultimate and destroy other lanes, and that's fine. That's, it's a really good pick when done right as well. And, of course, Lee Sin, very strong pick in the jungle, works really well in pretty much all phases of the game. Late game, although, kind of fall off a little bit, but he did get a patch where his ultimate got buffed for, like, health percentage damage. But that's not the point. The point is that these two champions that were picked after Jace was picked, they are all physical damage. And the problem that happens when your team is full of physical damage is that it's gonna make the enemy team itemization really easy. Like, they are not gonna even have to think too much about what they're gonna buy, because they're gonna be like, oh, they're all physical damage. I guess I'll just build a bunch of armor then and turn into Malphite the Second. You know, like that's pretty much what's gonna happen. And when this happens, it means that your entire team is gonna be dealing a lot less damage as a whole, and your AD carry is going to be forced to rush a Last Whisper really early, more earlier than they want to, and because the AD carry's role is to actually deal damage, and by having the entire team, stack armor, it's gonna make it that much harder for them to deal damage. And therefore, by having gone a physical damage champion over the entire team, you have made it hell for your team to deal damage, because the moment you don't, start winning hard early, or you stalemate or you give away a lead, the enemy team is most likely is going to win, because they have the option to itemize a lot better, a lot easier, and it's a pretty big deal. Like, it messes up so many things. It's not even funny, and it's kind of scared me away from first picking AD mid laners, because I feel like people are just not gonna pick an AP top laner or an AP jungler. Of course, people usually try to say, oh, can you go an AP top or AP jungle? And sometimes people will actually comply and they will do that for you. I personally, when I see someone pick an AD mid, I instantly think I need to play an AP top laner right now, I'm not like one of those people who are like, oh, I can only play one physical damage champion anyway, so I'm just gonna pick him in top lane. No, I really want to make sure that if this is gonna take off, I'm gonna make sure that in team fights we're not gonna become like these people who just throw, like, I don't know, little needles at people that barely do any damage. So I was like, fuck that. I'm going to Kennen top, right? Even though that might not have been my original plan, I adapt, because that is what Champion Select is about. You have to pick what works well with your team and against the enemy team. I don't know how many times I've said that by now, but I cannot emphasize it enough. It's really important. And yeah, I guess the same kind of applies when your entire team goes magic damage, but it's a little bit different, because at least there's going to be an AD carry who's, a full damage champion that is going to be pretty much just be doing physical damage. So if you have 4 other champions that deal mainly magic damage, it's not really going to be as much of a problem just because of the AD carry. Of course, in the other way, where like you have a bunch of AD champions, you could also pick a champion as an AD that actually deals a lot of magic damage. This is Corki, or maybe even Kog'Maw a little bit. Or you could even go into an extreme and play Orianna, Ryze, Vladimir. I've seen these champions actually being picked instead of an AD carry and work out in high elo, because the entire team pretty much just picked AD champions, and this AD carry person just wanted to make sure that the enemy team wasn't just gonna stack armor and win, so they went for a mage. And I applaud people for breaking the meta like that, because sometimes that is the key to victory. You just have to make sure that the enemy team doesn't have like the easiest path to victory. So yeah, it matters a lot what you pick in Champion Select, and sometimes your pick might just be the one pick that wins the entire game. You never know, because if you play the game a few times and you don't really understand the impact that champion choices have, then you probably still have a bit to go when it comes to understanding the game as a whole, because there's a really big dynamic depth to team comps and such. And sadly, I cannot talk about all of them in this video. It would take way too long. But just by playing more and watching maybe other people play, you will learn over time like what works well together and what works well against certain things, and what you should probably be picking when you've seen your entire team comp. Oh, and if you're gonna be first picking the champion select, make sure that you pick a champion that is really hard to punish with certain picks. So like, let's say right now the most punishable pick that I can think of is Twisted Fate. Like, let's say there's a Twisted Fate first pick. Like, in Season 2, this was my thing, right? Like, whenever Twisted Fate was open and I was first pick, I would insta-log that sucker instantly. And then disaster happened. The enemy team had, they had to pick their 2 picks afterwards. And I see Fizz and Olaf picked. What is the problem with these picks? They both have a way to deny Twist of Fate's stun card, because Twist of Fate's stun card is a little bit slow. Like he has to first pick it, and then it shows above his head. Oh, my stun card is ready. I'm about to stun you. And these two champions have ways to avoid that stun card completely. Olaf uses ultimates and he's fine, and Fizz needs to E and he's fine from getting stunned. And then I was like, oh damn, those champions, they really suck to play Twist of Fate against. And then I see Nocturne being picked, and that's a champion with a spell shield. All he has to do is press W, and then he not only blocks your stun, but he also gets attack speed, so he starts dealing more damage. And then the bot lane gets picked, and I see Severe Morgana. That was like the nightmare bot lane to face, and you have no idea how many times I saw that comp whenever I first picked Twist of Fate. And it was because in higher elos, people really start understanding what is good against what. And it's not that your pick has to be good against your lane. Sometimes if your pick completely nullifies another pick on the on the enemy team, you technically make the game a 4 versus 5 in like a bigger picture. And by making it like so that Twist of Fate cannot effectively gank with his ultimate, you make him a really bad pick. And that's the danger of first picking him. You just you're gonna have a tough time sometimes, and yeah, you're gonna get punished by experienced players, such as what I did back in those days. These days, I don't really first pick TF that often. I only do when I feel like, oh, I want to play TF today. But when I understand the risks of first picking TF, so I don't do it as often now, is what I'm trying to say. And obviously, maybe TF was a very extreme choice, or extreme example of, punishing a first pick. But there are other champions that can also be punished like this. So take the first pick into consideration a lot, because the enemy team is most likely going to play around that and really punish you hard. If not, then they obviously don't think about champions like too much, and they just don't respect it at all. But if that happens, it's the nightmare, and it's really terrible. And that's why you need to go for a champion, a first pick that is very flexible, that can be played in different lanes. You can change your mind if you get completely counterpicked in a lane, or you can play a champion that is just really hard to counter, such as Ari or something. A really safe laner that is also really strong in almost all parts of the game, pretty much. So yeah, I guess that is all I have to say about Champions League, really, because I could be going on forever, but I feel like I pretty much, I talked about the basics when it comes to the importance, and also, the little details that you really need to start paying attention to. So I hope you guys learned something from this discussion, and hopefully, you kind of realize what you might be doing wrong, because this was like the most unobvious thing for me for the longest time, until I started facing that Kennen dilemma in my head, and I realized, maybe I should not be playing Kennen as much when I know I'm playing with these champions. So yeah, that was my revelation back then, and to this day it's very useful to know, and it's really been helping me out a lot. So hopefully this helped you, and I'm just gonna thank you all for spending the time to watch this. So thank you guys for watching this Elo discussion, and I'm hoping to see you guys for tomorrow's game, which should be my first game in Platinum. Alright, this has been me, SteveRoxorz, and I'll see you guys around.